Thomas sat heavily on the wooden chair, his weathered hands gripping his knees. The afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows of the old workshop, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. At 62 years old, his back ached from a lifetime of labor, but today a different kind of pain weighed on him. Across the room, Lyra moved quietly, her blue skin catching the pale light. She was one of the rendered, as people called them now. The aliens had arrived 15 years ago, not in warships but in desperation. Their world was dying, and Earth had agreed to take them in. They looked human enough, except for their azure skin and the subtle ridge along their foreheads. They spoke our languages, learned our ways, and asked only for a chance to survive. Thomas had employed Lyra for 3 years. She cleaned his workshop twice a week, never complained, and always left things spotless. But he had never really seen her. Not truly. Today was different. Lyra knelt before him, a basin of warm water in her hands. She had insisted on this, though Thomas had protested. His boots were caked with mud and oil, and his feet were callous and worn. He felt ashamed to let her do this. "Please," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't have to do this." Lyra looked up at him, her violet eyes gentle. "I know I don't have to, Thomas, but I want to." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Thomas looked down at his hands, those same hands that had once held a sign at a protest 5 years ago. He remembered the anger in his chest, the fear of change, the words he had shouted. "Go back where you came from." He had believed he was protecting something, but he couldn't even remember what anymore. He had seen Lyra at that protest. She had been walking past with her young daughter, holding the child's hand. She had looked at him, not with anger, but with a sadness so profound it had haunted him ever since. Yet, when he posted a job for help in his workshop 2 years later, she had applied. She had looked him in the eye and said she needed the work. He had hired her because he needed the help, but he had never apologized, not once in 3 years. "I was at the protest," Thomas said suddenly, the words tumbling out. 5 years ago, downtown. I was holding a sign. I said terrible things. Lyra's hands paused for just a moment in the water, then continued their gentle work, removing his boots. "I know," she said softly. "I saw you there." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "You saw me, and you still came to work for me?" "I saw a man who was afraid," Lyra replied. "Fear makes people say things they don't always mean, and people can change." "But I never apologized," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "For 3 years you've come here, worked hard, been nothing but kind, and I never said I was sorry." Lyra gently lowered his foot into the warm water. The sensation was soothing, but Thomas barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on this woman, this being he had once seen as other, as less as a threat. "When my husband died last year," Lyra said quietly, "you gave me 2 weeks off with full pay. You said it was because you were repainting the workshop, but there was no painting done. You left meals at my door. You never mentioned it, but I knew it was you." Thomas remembered. He had heard about her loss through the neighborhood talk. Her husband had been killed in an accident at the construction site where he worked. Lyra had been left alone with their daughter. Thomas had not known what to say, so he had done what he could in silence. "That wasn't enough," Thomas said. "That doesn't make up for the hate." "No," Lyra agreed, washing his feet with careful attention. "But it was a beginning. Thomas, I've lived in 6 different places since coming to Earth. Do you know what I've learned? That most people are good, but many are scared. And scared people need time to remember their goodness." She paused, wringing out the cloth. "My grandmother used to say that an apology is not a magic spell that erases the past. It's a bridge we build to walk into a better future. But the bridge requires work from both sides. Thomas felt tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. In all his years through the death of his wife, the struggles of raising his son alone, the hardships of keeping a small business alive, he had learned to hold his emotions tight. But now, watching this woman wash his feet with such tenderness, the dam broke. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so deeply sorry, Lyra. I was wrong. I was angry at the world, at changes I didn't understand, and I took it out on people who had done nothing but seek safety. You and your people didn't deserve that. You deserved welcome and kindness, and I gave you hatred instead." Lyra looked up at him, and Thomas saw tears glistening in her eyes, too. "I accept your apology, Thomas," she said, "and I forgive you." She dried his feet carefully, then stood. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two souls who had walked very different paths to arrive at this moment of grace. "My daughter," Lyra said, reaching into her pocket, "she draws pictures. She drew one of you last week." She handed him a folded piece of paper. Thomas opened it with trembling hands. The crayon drawing showed him standing in his workshop, holding a wrench, with a big smile on his face. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Mr. Thomas, my mom's friend." "She thinks of me as your friend?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. "She sees how you treat me now," Lyra said. "Children notice everything. She sees that you ask about our week, that you make sure I take breaks, that you've started making extra lunch so I don't have to eat the stale sandwiches I bring. She sees kindness." Thomas folded the drawing carefully and pressed it to his chest. "May I keep this?" "She made it for you," Lyra smiled. They stood in the workshop as the afternoon light began to fade, two people separated by worlds but connected by something more powerful than fear. The human capacity for growth, for regret, and for forgiveness. "Thank you," Thomas said finally, "not just for forgiving me, but for giving me the chance to be better." Lyra picked up the basin. "We're all just trying to find our way, Thomas. Some of us are blue, some are not, but we all stumble in the dark sometimes. What matters is whether we're willing to help each other find the light." As she walked toward the door, Thomas called out, "Lyra?" She turned. "Would you and your daughter like to come for dinner next Sunday? I make a decent pot roast. Nothing fancy, but there's always too much for one person." Lyra's smile was radiant. "We would love that, Thomas. We would love that very much." After she left, Thomas sat in his workshop for a long time, holding the drawing, thinking about bridges and second chances. Outside, the world was changing, had always been changing, would always change. But maybe, he thought, maybe that wasn't something to fear after all. Maybe change was just another word for growth.